Yeah, so I'm Gideon. Actually, it was a really fascinating talk by Boris. I really enjoyed it, and I think a lot of the stuff he talked about kind of resonated with me. Also, we kind of like overlap our careers for many years, so it's really great to see him. And kind of overall, just by the reception and all that, I really feel like home in these UX events. No other kind of events. I see the people that I like to really talk to and meet in front. So great job for organizing. So this is me. I now work for an innovation lab in Singapore. It's part of a bigger Australian insurance company. And before that, working in MediaCorp, IBM, doing a lot of consulting with some of you guys in the audience as well. And I have a problem with Korean dramas, but I won't talk about it that much today. Does this work? Okay. So my talk today, I think, this event is pretty much about UX and emerging tech. And I think I'm one of the lucky people who were able to kind of really work on this, on both on UX and emerging tech in the past few years. So I joined the Innovation Lab about half a year ago, and I think a lot of this talk will be sharing my experience of working with data scientists, working on artificial intelligence and a lot of emerging technologies, and together with a few other people in the team, bringing UX into the mix as well. And yeah, so it's designing artificial intelligence, and the bottom slogan for human with real intelligence. I hope that will get you to think a bit what does intelligence mean, and about humans as well. So what's the deal with artificial intelligence? So I put a few good quotes here. Sundar Pichai, who is from Google, Google office is very much behind this building. And so he's kind of like the godfather of AI in this modern era. He's the one who kind of made a very famous speech about a few years ago how much it's really important, and everybody in the industry started to kind of follow that. And he's saying that it's one of the most important things humanity is working on. It's even more profound than electricity or fire. So that's wow, that's a big statement. It means AI is like one of the next biggest important things for us as humans. Hawkins paints a very dire picture about AI becoming like the next threat to humanity. It can disrupt our economy, and it can do all these kind of things. And Elon Musk is just saying that it's a bigger threat than North Korea, a much condensed version of what Stephen Hawking says. What's the deal with AI? It's kind of like the new thing that everybody is kind of afraid it will take their jobs. Everybody is kind of worried that we'll have human competing against machines, and machines starting to destroy us and all these kind of things. And you'll see that kind of AI become very advanced these days. I mean, can do a lot of really mind-blowing things, even face detection, which you would imagine like maybe 10 years ago would have been a very basic kind of algorithm. And these days you can spot like hundreds of people in the same picture, and you can spot like people just walking around in the middle of the street. And we all know like countries like China do that all the time. NLP is getting really efficient, and you can pretty much translate almost any language to any language. It's not the best, but it works. And all these kind of other things. We've been beating Grandmaster at chess. We've been selling art that's been made by machines for a lot of money. But you'll notice that that we are still kind of in a transition period. So even though AI can do a lot of really thorough and very complex algorithms, they're not always perfect. I mean, they don't always give the wanted result. And that's what this talk will be about, how to kind of tame this wild beast that makes a lot of mistakes here and there, but also does a lot of really wonderful things. So the examples I give here, unfortunately, there was a fatal kind of crash for the Uber autonomous vehicles. You've probably heard about this before. It's not the only one, by the way. And this is an example where AI kind of recognizes a pumpkin as a face. So face recognition doesn't always work as well. And the last one is from Taobao. So I was trying to buy this sound card, and I was trying to see if, I was reading the reviews and seeing whether I really want to buy it or not. And this was the kind of reviews that I was seeing, which were translated from Chinese. So there was no accident in the sound, and there was a penny. So you can imagine how hard it was to make a decision whether to buy this or not. But this is the kind of stuff that, that you see that AI kind of making, to us it may seem like mistakes, but it's just a machine, I mean, it's kind of programmed, it doesn't really fit all of the 100%, all of the different scenarios that you have. So the reasons for that is actually, it's just because we're in a transition period right now. I mean, we've been many years kind of not really building up the right grounds for AI to happen well, and we haven't been collecting the right data, and AI needs a lot of data to train. It also needs a lot of tweaking and bias kind of correction, which we haven't been doing as much. And in a lot of cases, it's very hard to test. So how do you test autonomous vehicles in the middle of a highway or in the middle of a road? It's very difficult. A lot of companies just do it with like virtual roads and things like that. But it eventually has to go on the real road to be tested for the real life. So the next slide is actually, it's a question for you guys, not for me. I don't know the answer myself, but I hope you guys know. So what is intelligence? I'll give the microphone to random people unless somebody raised their hand.
I don't know.
I don't know. That's kind of like the most intelligent answer about what is intelligence.
Okay, I'll give it a shot. The ability to process stimuli, like messages that you receive, and then communicate, like basically to respond as well in kind, whether with a message or an action, based on, I would feel like a kind of a process of judgment. However, that comes to be with AI, well.
Wow, that was a great answer. I think, come on stage with me. Anyone else wants to give a shot?
I guess when I think about intelligence, I think about it from an emotional point of view, like what you were mentioning, like the bias, and as society, what kind of like decisions are we making as a whole?
Okay, great. So also decision making. Anyone else randomly wants to be picked by me? Okay.
I think it's the ability to be truly creative.
Okay, creativity as well, yeah. All great stuff, actually. I think, anyone else? Okay, I'll just continue. I think we kind of gave a few different things that at least we perceive as being intelligence. I mean, some of it is emotional, some of it is about creativity. A lot of these things we don't really attribute to machines right now. Kind of another question, and this one goes only to ladies. I'm not sure why I put that there, but no. I guess I put the wrong gender in the slide. So, why do we need to be intelligent?
Maybe because so that we'll be able to apply whatever we know.
Okay, applying what we know. Any other ideas?
In order to make solutions to all the problems.
Okay, in order to make solutions to solve problems. We have somebody raising their hand.
Because intelligence leads to survival.
That's right. Fantastic answer. And you kind of read my mind as well. Intelligence equals survival. I think the other answers were great as well, but pretty much why do we humans, why do we animals, why do we need intelligence is mainly so we can kind of survive and continue our species. And the question is, so why do kind of machines need intelligence? Why do computers or algorithms? And the answer is right now they don't really need to survive. And until they do, they don't really need to be that intelligent. I hope this makes sense to you. But, until machines do need to survive, which is not yet, it's really the art of faking it. I mean, we're pretty much building things to simulate intelligence. It's not real intelligence yet. And there kind of begs the question as well, how intelligent are we as humans? And we perceive that we definitely are. We managed to survive through all this horrible kind of earth that we live in, and very challenging grounds and all that. But machines don't really have that. It's just kind of for our purpose of making our lives better and all these kind of things. So a lot of the time, when we do attribute all these intelligent factors to machines, it's really just fake, you know? I mean, it's not really somebody or some animal trying to kind of exist as their own species or something like that. It's really somebody wrote an algorithm to make something more efficient, to make something more human-like. So how do we build interactions around AI? So we talked about AI being fake. We talked about AI being very kind of complex, very interesting, can do a lot of stuff that we didn't imagine we can do before with machines and algorithms. And then the question is kind of how do we build interactions? How do we build user experiences around AI? So what I'll be doing next, because I need to get some water also, I'll be showing you a video clip. And this is a real video clip from YouTube. And some of the audience may have seen it before. But it's basically how one very special lady, one human being, interacts with an algorithm, basically with an AI machine. And a lot of you already know this AI. Do we have sound? You want me to try? Okay, we'll just arrange the sound. Oops. Okay, we're back. You want me to just try? Oh, the cord I have already. Yeah, okay. So, and while we're watching this video, I want everyone to take notes in their notebooks or whatever you can. If it's you don't have a notebook, take it in your mind. Just observe this video and kind of note down the special, interesting things that you see about how this lady is interacting with something that's basically an artificial intelligent agent. Oops. Oh, there's no sound. Okay, sorry. We'll get the sound sorted.
Cuckoo! What is raining today? Water.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it answered.
What?
It said yeah.
You say yeah?
Yeah, it's her.
Oh my God. It's a woman?
Yeah.
I'm glad to meet
What
you.
is this thing?
Hello, Cuckoo.
Hey, you're okay.
That's something from
Google.
the Alphabets.
You have to say, hey, Google, or okay.
Hey, Google. Okay, Google.
What's the weather?
Yeah.
What's the weather, ask?
What the weather? You want to know what is the weather?
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
In Flagler Beach tomorrow, there will be showers with a high of 65 and a low of 56.
With this. It's a mystery.
What's it there?
I'm scared. I'm scared. It's a mystery. Oh my gosh. No.
Ask Google to play an Italian song.
Cuckoo. Hi, Cuckoo.
You have to say hey or okay.
Hey, okay.
Google.
Tomorrow in London, it'll be sunny with a high of 41 and a low of 30.
What did it from over there?
the temperature in London?
Mom, I asked her to play your favorite song.
Play your favorite song.
Cuckoo! Cuckoo!
Yeah, you're cuckoo, all right.
Cuckoo, play a song for me. Piemontesina bella.
You have to say.
Addio dei giorni passati.
You're not doing anything.
Addio.
So, okay, you don't have to tap it first. But to wake it up, you have to either say, hey, Google, or okay.
Hey, Google. Okay, Google.
Play an Italian song.
And then
Play
it'll
an
like,
Italian
so it
song.
has to light up after you say that, otherwise it didn't hear you correctly.
Yes.
Io no è un salame perché mia capisci cosa dici? I get it.
You're stupid, because I can understand everything I'm saying to you.
Hello, Cuckoo.
Hey or okay?
Okay,
Google.
do it.
Okay, so that was about 2 minutes video. You saw firsthand how people actually interact with basically an artificial intelligence agent. In this case, you all know it's the Google Home. She's been saying the word Google many times, and probably somebody from the next building is hearing us right now because they hear everything. But yeah, how many of you wrote any notes? Okay, a lot of hands. So who wants to share something that they noted down?
Me again. She keeps tapping on the device before speaking to Google.
Okay, that's great. Keep tapping on the device before speaking. Anyone else? Oh, good.
She didn't have an idea of how to interact with it, so she was using her hands, she was using her voice, but did not figure out what would help her get her answers.
That's right, yeah. Good observation. I mean, she's basically clueless to how to make this thing respond to her, so she tries everything she can, basically.
I noticed that she had to say a very specific syntax before she got any kind of reaction. So I think the learning curve is very steep for someone who's never interacted with AI. And once she did get a correct answer, she was surprised, right? So that's another delight aspect too.
Okay, so very good points. So you mentioned delight. You mentioned the fact that she needed to use explicit commands, basically, rather than spoken English. Anyone else wrote any good notes? You're kind of looking at me like you have something.
It needs error tolerance to factor in language accents like Italian, right? So it has something a lot more broader because she can't pronounce Google. She's saying Google, right? Yeah.
Great, yeah. So it actually needs to recognize her Italian accent. And also, yeah, it's a very good observation. I saw some other one, it will be the last one.
I noticed she doesn't know Google that only take one order at one time. So in the end, she said, just do it. But she don't know Google actually don't remember the last order.
You're right, yeah, great. It's also, yeah, it's very, very correct. Google Home just takes kind of the last command or just takes one at a time, basically. So what we've seen here, I'll just run you through my version of it. So it's kind of like she's an old lady, she's an old Italian grandmother, and her first interaction with Google Home is almost like a roller coaster ride for 2 minutes. You know, and she went, all the way up and all the way down emotionally, and this. And the first thing, she keeps on talking into the device, and I think some of you kind of touched about it. But the reason is that she's just looking for what to talk to, you know what I mean? But in essence, when you think about it, the Google Home can be totally invisible. It could be in your cupboard, and you can talk to it and trigger it. You don't have to press any buttons or anything like that. That's kind of the magic of doing this kind of device. But she doesn't get it up front. It's not that natural for her. After that, extreme delight. I think some of you mentioned that as well. So when she actually managed to get her to understand, she was totally high in excitement. But all of a sudden, it becomes very weird. You know, what just happened here? She has to grab her husband's hand, and the husband is shocked himself as well. And she has to kind of figure out what happened. And then she gets a bit more curious again and gets a bit more confident and goes back to the table, starts singing songs in Italian to her best friend, Google Home. And all of a sudden, she's back to square one. You know, Google Home doesn't understand her. And so 2 minutes of this roller coaster ride is what most of the users will kind of enjoy when we first introduce them to a lot of these new AI interactions. Another observation is you saw that there was a lot of guidance from the family of how to use it. And the question is, you know, how would she discover these things by herself, even at all? And I'll talk about that a bit later. There is indication of speaking, but there is no indication of hearing. So nothing is telling her that what she's saying is actually being heard. And the long-lasting question is, will she actually convert? Will she be a user that uses it maybe more than once a day or whatever Google sees as their metrics, as Boris shared? Is she going to acquire this as a new habit in her daily life? Oops. And so this is when I joined the lab that I work right now, we did a kind of a user research, about a few weeks of research on elderly and home assistants. And it kind of like looked like that video in most cases. So we did some ethnographic. We went to people's home and kind of tested them with Google Home. And these are the 2 gaps that we noticed. One of them is stickiness. So basically, from all the people that we tested, they couldn't really find something to use it for on a daily basis. You know, it was interesting for them experience, but when we asked them, what are you going to do with it? They totally went blank, you know, I mean, they didn't really find anything they want to do with it. And proactiveness. So I think one of you mentioned explicit commands. Google Home pretty much works in a one-way street. You basically ask Google, tell me the weather, tell me a funny joke, and it will tell you a funny joke. But for the elderly, they need something to talk back to them every once in a while. So for example, if you are like sitting down for too long, Google may say, you've been sitting down for too long, why don't you grab a cup of tea or something like that and get them a bit more active. So proactiveness was also missing here. And the question is, how do you create proactiveness in all these kind of new experiences? And the answer to that is having sensors alongside the kind of main experience. And when I say sensors, it can be any kind of sensor. It could be a temperature sensor, could be a gyroscope, could be something that measures your electricity power consumption up and down. And all these things, the more you kind of be able to capture and analyze, the better you can create new experiences and create this effect of proactiveness. And I'll show you this video by this team in Carnegie Mellon in US, how they use the sensors to capture all these events. Okay, so I'll stop it. So what you see here is actually what just happened is Carnegie Mellon students, basically they made up this super sensor. It's like a one kind of device with a lot of different sensors. And they just measure everything that happens in the environment, whether it's just by sound, which using a microphone sensor, or just looking at the ripples in your electricity by hooking an EMI sensor. And they are able to kind of detect different patterns that happen in the environment. So for example, if a door opens, it kind of like it will slightly change the temperature in the room. It will make a sound. And all these kind of things, they can attribute that to a door opening next time if they manage to capture it in a lot of occasions. And once you do that, you start kind of gaining a much better or a much richer understanding of where your user is. And you start kind of bringing all this back to the main experience, which in the previous one, it was a Google Home Home Assistant. So imagine the Home Assistant, before that, all it could do was accept commands. Tell me the weather, tell me the time. But now it can actually be proactive. It can say, oh, the door was opened. Maybe I'll kind of trigger some interaction. Or your microwave is on, therefore I'll use another kind of trigger for you. So that's kind of where AI and all that is starting to head. And you have to kind of mix what you call IoT or sensors into the mix in order to really create a good experience. And at the lab that I work in, we had a really good opportunity to meet this guy called Serge. And he's one of the more prominent autonomous vehicle people. So he's kind of helping Singapore also to set up the test that they have here. And he talks in a lot of conferences. And in autonomous vehicles, they had a very classical measure of how advanced their technology is. And it was pretty much based on how autonomous it used to be. So from being just a manual car to fully autonomous, and they had all these scales. And what Serge is saying is that actually that's not the real measure for the technology. The real measure will be how well it interacts with humans. So imagine yourself walking in the street, and an autonomous vehicle comes in front of you. And we all had these moments where we can look at the actual human driver and see whether he's going to go first and hit me, or can I just cross the road? How do you do that with an autonomous vehicle? How do you stare at the autonomous vehicle's eyes? How do you give him a hint that I'm going to cross or he's going to cross? All these things will have to be done by carefully kind of analyzing the situation and basically with sensors. So the autonomous vehicle will have its own sensors that are able to look in your face and kind of analyze your intention. But it will also have to give you back feedback that you can go or I'm going to go, you know what I mean? So this is kind of going to be very interesting to see how these things evolve. You all know skeuomorphism. Raise your hands if you haven't heard of this term before. Okay, one. Okay, so skeuomorphism, it's a common term from the web and mobile as well. So when web and mobile started, people tried to create things that look like the real life to make it easier for users to acquire it as a new thing. So for example, to switch on something, they will put a light switch that's physical. It looks real. Some people associate already with light switch, so it's a switch to most people. It's very easy to acquire. And the same thing is happening with AI. So this is a company from New Zealand called Soul Machines, and they create these kind of human-looking androids, and eventually being used by banks and travel companies to populate their chatbots and different experiences. And you can see how real it is. It's very kind of much mimicking a human being. And the real question is, why do you actually need to mimic a human being? We saw Google Home, just a little device, and it can do the job. And the reason you need to do it is skeuomorphism. It's much easier for users to kind of accept it as an intelligent thing when it's dressed up like a human being. One of the problems with doing skeuomorphic design is this thing. It's called the uncanny valley. It's one of the artifacts that come up. And that's when things kind of look like the real thing, but a little bit off. You know what I mean? So this is a term by Freud, the famous psychoanalyst. And the uncanny valley, basically it's a state of discomfort. You know, I mean, you're talking to an android, so the previous lady, even though she looks very real, but there is something a bit weird in it, you know what I mean? Something that makes you a bit uncomfortable. And you saw with our grandmother, she also kind of like, suddenly she got very, you know, she found this whole thing very, very weird and kind of jumped up and all that. And it's not a really good experience. But the good news is that we are starting to build new form factors for AI. So you saw Google Home is like a little bulgy thing that has LEDs on it, and people associate it with a smart device. And you see that Waymo's, also by Google, also looks like a smart device to a lot of us. You know what I mean? So, and the only reason this is happening is because we're starting to kind of put a new form factor, a new face to things that are intelligent. So when you had, like, in the olden days, those kind of fake magic cars, they looked like they are smart just because they had LEDs blinking in the front. And the same here. So you'll have to find kind of all these new cues to make things look like they are AI enabled. And you'll see more and more devices kind of adopting these new design patterns that make it look like it's intelligent. So another problem is that, and I think I mentioned it at the beginning, when you saw that they recognize like pumpkins as face and all these things, AI does get things wrong. So if any of you have tried chatbots before, you'll notice that the conversation just becomes a bit dull and meaningless very fast, just because the AI is programmed to do something very specific. We did research as well in the company that I worked in, and we found out that the chatbot that we made basically becomes a good navigational tool. It doesn't really, people don't have conversations with it, but it's very good at directing people to the right resource. And this is a real study. Oh, I haven't been talking to microphone that much. So this is a real study by a company called LivePerson, and Mike maybe heard of them. I used to work for them at some point. They interviewed about 5,000 people from different countries, and they asked them different things about their experience with chatbots. And most people, this is a specific question: how should the chatbot react if it doesn't understand your question? And most people said it will transfer you to a human. So it's kind of like, again, we're in a transition period. You cannot expect all these technologies to be perfect and kind of match all the use cases. And another interesting fact is that people actually use it for different purposes than you thought it was. You know what I mean? So when you make a publicly available chatbot and all that, you have to be wary that it may not be just used for, you know, converting people to buy house loans or things like that. This is a very famous article from Singapore, OCBC chatbot, and there was this guy who was like a serial, you know, trying to date with chatbots. So he's like, he posted all of these things on his social media after he tried his luck to get these chatbot ladies. And it didn't work, of course. And the reason it didn't work is because it wasn't really built for that, you know what I mean? But you'll be very surprised that people don't really use AI for what you thought they would use. And yeah, I don't know if you noticed this thing, but it's very true. Another thing is over-expectation. So we think that AI can do a lot of things that it cannot do, or we think that it does them 100% well, when it's actually not really 100% well. It's only maybe 70% well. And you know, for example, this is a good example where people have kind of a misconception that Google can do everything for you, maybe even like order pizzas and stuff like that. But a lot of people get very disappointed. We've all probably read articles in the newsfeed how AI will solve cancer and how AI will do this. But the reality is much more complicated than that to get right. We're not there yet. And the next part is under expectations. So how do we know what features does this new AI have? We don't know, you know, I mean, it's all hidden. So we're dealing with like new forms of interactions. A lot of them are totally hidden from us. There is no menu of functionality, and you don't really know what it does, you know what I mean? And it may have like amazing features, and it may be able to do a lot of amazing things, but we have to really work on kind of helping people to understand how to find them. And this is a good example where a toddler, and this is a real video clip shared by their parents, and he's just kind of casually talking to Alexa, and all of a sudden, Alexa starts kind of almost putting some porn for him, and you can see his parents are like jumping and no, Alexa, stop, Alexa, stop. And it's also funny to see like Alexa, you know, the parents are talking to Alexa as if it's like some naughty cousin or something like that, that just wants to destroy their kid's childhood. But it's the reality, you know, I mean, there is a lot of things that you may trigger that come as a total surprise, and a lot of them are unexpected and even negative experience for some people. So, and I'm like, I don't know how much time I have left, but it's looking good. This is my last slide. So with all this kind of, you'll notice that AI is almost like the next frontier for us people who work in UX. We're all doing like mobile apps and websites and all these things, but this is the next generation that's coming up. And it's a totally wild beast that can work unexpectedly and do a lot of weird stuff. And you don't have full control over it as a product team or as a UX person. And that's what makes it fascinating. It's like the new frontier. You'll have to kind of learn and acquire it as a new language of dealing with things. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Any questions?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that fascinating AI talk. Did anyone read this article this morning that asking question improves your ability to do AI? True or not? True. It's true. So how many of you are ready to improve your AI ability? So we'll take a couple of questions from the floor, and let's see what Slido has. Okay, the burning question in the room is, do you think AI will make humans lazy and life boring for people using it? What do you think, Gideon?
Lazy and life boring for people using it. By the way, I like all of your names. They kind of sound the same. Do I think it will make lazy and life boring? That's a great, actually, this is a fantastic question. And the reason it's a fantastic question is because you'll notice that what happens, and I think you've all seen my synopsis for this talk was very clickbaity on purpose, so you guys can actually want to hear me. But it's basically things, people acquire these kind of things gradually. It's not immediate, you know what I mean? When things come too immediately, people get kind of like surprised, and all these kind of negative behaviors come in. But all these things will come in a span of many years. And even if like 20 years from now, the job that you're doing will be replaced by a machine, you won't be that angry about it. Just because it took a long time to happen, and you kind of like settle in and you understand it, and you feel like it's part of the real world that you live in. And same with AI. So we always kind of talk about this generation hooked up to their phone and not being social and all this kind of stuff. But we kind of accept that social is not just people talking to each other face to face. Social means a lot of other things these days. You know, we talk on social media and we share a lot of things that we like with other people, and it kind of manifests, all these human needs kind of manifest anyways. And laziness is a human need, and it will still happen with AI as well. That's my answer.
Great.
Yeah.
Let's ask Google another question. How do you measure okay, let's take the one that's up on the poll. How do you measure and determine how well AI will interact with human? I think this is more geared towards the metrics of how will you know whether AI is successful or working well for you.
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's very case by case, of course. it's also a new field, so I don't think there is like established metrics yet, and you still have to rely on the existing metrics that you have. If your metrics are conversion based or delight based, you'll still use the same things to decide how well this thing performs. And what you describe here is really the performance angle, is how well they interact. If that becomes your main metrics on how well they interact, then you have to find a way to kind of measure that. I don't think there is like a global score or anything like that yet. You'll have to find that yourself.
Sure. Let's take one more from Slido. What is the most exciting AI design product/organization that we should be looking out for?
Oh, wow, that's a very tough question.
That's actually my question.
Oh, really? Okay, yeah. That's why. So it's all exciting. Don't think of something more exciting than this. I think we've all seen Back to the Future at some point, and we're all disappointed that it's after 2015 and we don't have flying cars. I would love to see flying cars.
All of us.
Yeah. But there is a lot of really interesting things happening that are not that sexy or exciting, but to me they are very exciting. You know, like things in health that look at cancer and look at all these kind of things. I think that will be probably the more breakthrough things that we don't realize are there until we are actually face these kind of health issues or stuff like that. But exciting things, I mean, autonomous vehicles are crazy exciting, you know what I mean? If you go to One North, you'll start seeing a bit how they behave. But just think about, and this is something we're doing in the lab that I work on, think about how the things will look like when you have both human and autonomous vehicles driving on the same road, let's say 50-50%. And that's when it gets really interesting. That's where either AI has to be really smart or we have to really adapt ourselves to make it happen.
Okay, awesome. Questions from the floor? Okay, we have one.
Hi. You touched upon two topics about skeuomorphism and managing expectations when it comes to AI. So how do you strike a balance when you turn something human-like and then create the expectation that it will behave like a human versus don't tell them it's human but it's a robot and then they are underwhelmed. So where's the balance and how do you strike?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the problem with doing things that look human is that it's also overwhelming, you know what I mean? Because it's not exactly human. So people have little antennas in their brains and they can recognize the real thing versus the real thing, not the real thing. And that's where they get very uncomfortable, you know what I mean? So I'm more in the camp of doing things that look like robots than look like actual humans, yeah.
Okay. Can we know who this wonderful lady is, your name, so we all know who asked that wonderful question?
Meenaka.
Meenaka asked that wonderful question.
Thank you very much.
That's a beautiful name. Do we have any other question from the floor? Or else we'll wrap up. Or I can come hunt you down. Anything interesting?
Hi, I'm Zoe. So this is going to be a very kind of like Matrix X question, but there was this sensationalistic article, or a few of them that were written not too long ago, about how AI has a tendency to develop its own language because English or whatever language is actually quite inefficient. I guess I'm wondering, and I know it's hard to predict, but how likely is it that AI would actually develop a very different set of values or objectives from humans, and do you have any idea what they are, and is there any way for us to predict it?
Oh, that's a very good question. And the answer is that at this stage, it's still us being on the driver's seat, you know what I mean, not AI. So AI is not become yet that thing that will start develop its own personality and all this kind of stuff, unless we artificially create it for it, you know what I mean? But one of the interesting things about what you asked is that there is kind of, and now there is a need to create new kind of languages and new kind of baseline things that are more adequate for machines than humans. So we all look at, like, a very classic example is your password, which you all know my password, but passwords are very much targeted to human beings, You know what I mean? We'll say it must have a lowercase level, it must have a whatever, at least one kind of exclamation mark, or it has to have 8 characters. But to machines, it doesn't really matter all these things. It's only for us, you know what I mean? We're trying to prevent ourselves from hacking. And it's a very classical misconception that we are kind of designing something as simple as a password rule. We're designing it in the brain of the human, but actually machines are the ones who are going to kind of interpret it and try to hack it and all that, and they don't care about capital letters and all that. They have their own kind of hacks and whatever. Same for language. You have to start to abstract languages from English, Italian and all that to a much lower level. It's a thing called phenoms. It's just kind of like the sounds and all this kind of stuff. And that will pick up and become like its own thing eventually as well. Yeah.
Great. So unfortunately, that's all the time we have for Q&A. Can we give Gideon a round of applause for this wonderful talk?